so hot. It's so cold. 4 minutes? Okay, thank you. Oh, now they're gonna give driver's license to illegal aliens. Can you believe it? 2? Okay, thank you. No, I don't have a guess. Thank you. One more minute. One more minute. Is it one more minute? 1 minute? Okay. Minute, one more minute. Oh, it's so loud. He said red.
Warning, the following program has been rated T for truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Oh, we think you can. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and myth builder Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed Black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
Welcome. This is me, Kathleen Wells, your host. This is the Naked Truth Report, and you heard that promo with Dr. Claude Anderson, right? I love that because he said racial myths and misunderstandings. I mean, that's all that Native Black Americans have been sort of pushed into, racial myths and misunderstandings. I think that's true. Before I get into this, I titled this show A Case for Reparations Part 2, A New Deal for Black America. Because I take the position that Trump is the one. I don't know why folks who are talking about this reparation business are talking to Democrats. Because the Democrats have failed Native Black Americans for 5 decades, 6 decades. Why do you go back expecting something good from someone who has failed you for 6 decades? Why do you go to someone who has destroyed your group for 6 decades? Why do you expect anything good for them? It's like being accustomed to being with an abuser. If someone has abused you, do you go back to them and expect something good? That's the question. I don't think so. Before I get into that, I want to do some housekeeping, and I want to touch on the fact that Attorney General Barr, what did he say? Oh, I love that. All Trump supporters love what Attorney General Barr said. He said that there was spying taking place with the Trump. He says it's a huge deal to spy on a political opponent. And so Democrats he said that explicitly. He was definitive. He said, oh yeah, I can't remember the congresswoman. It was a woman who was asking him to clarify that. But he said, oh no, there was definitely spying going on. I just have to determine whether or not it was legitimate, if there was a predicate for that, if there was a legally reasonable basis to spy on the Trump campaign. I must explore that. That's so fantastic. So let's see, Schumer and the Democrats, Schumer and Pelosi and all those folks, Comey and all, they're squirming, trying to, this is what it is. The mainstream media is telling us, it's not really spying. Why did he use that word spying? See, that's what the Democrats do. For one, they major in the minors, they nitpick, and then they upset, the Democrats and the media. They major in the minors and they nitpick as opposed to looking at the big picture, So, it's like, he's using the wrong word saying spying. That's not the right word. Or he's just, sort of like, what is that expression? He's just, doing what Trump wants him to do. He's being like a surrogate for Trump. Now, people who don't know, who have not been examining politics closely, kind of fall for that sort of okie doke or understanding. But we know, Attorney General Barr has a stellar reputation, right? Why, when he was up for his confirmation, they didn't say like, oh, this guy he's shady, he lacks credibility. We didn't hear that, did we? But now, so this is the thing that you want to ask. So in other words, if there's a Republican president, if he has an attorney general, can a Republican president nominate an attorney general ever? Because, it's like Democrats will have a problem with they had a problem with Bush, but they really have a problem but Bush is the establishment, so it wasn't so bad. But they really have a problem with Trump. And the fact that the media and Republicans and Democrats have such a problem with him, lets the American people know, maybe we should stick with this. Because politicians have been destroying, our lying, our lacking credibility, our conning, our selling off America from day one, forever and a day. It's never been a good deal. It's always not good enough. It's always something fishy or some trick up the sleeve. I've said that before, right? So we know that Attorney General Barr was definitive, and we'll be getting the Mueller report, Tuesday, I think it's going to be received by Congress, and it will be redacted, yes, because, Barr is going to go according to the law, and the law requires that he redacts certain portions. In fact, I think he's divided it into four categories of him having to make redactions to be in compliance with the law. So we know that we're going to be getting it on Tuesday, and basically the full report with redactions, and basically Democrats are going to go through this and find that they're going to find something to smear Trump with, definitely. But the question is this. See, you have to follow this. The Mueller report said that there was no collusion with Russia. So if there's no collusion with Russia, how can you have obstruction of justice? Mueller did leave that a little shady, a little. He left it where the media could, play with it and the Democrats could play with it, but there's no obstruction, because what would he be obstructing if there's no collusion? What would he obstruct? There has to be a crime. And also Comey, if you remember, he told Trump 3 times, and I think even McCabe testified to this. He told Trump 3 times, Comey told Trump 3 times, and McCabe testified to this, that there was that Trump was not being investigated. If in Trump's mind there was nothing he was being investigated for, why would he have then, what would he be obstructing? No collusion, no obstruction. I went over this before. And Attorney General Barr has to investigate has to explore whether or not there was a proper predicate, if there was a sufficient legal basis for the FISA warrant to be to counter surveil, to spy on Trump's campaign. And this is what Democrats do. They always confuse and twist the meaning of words. And we see that with immigrants, the word immigrant, because now they say illegal aliens are immigrants. And we know the definition of an immigrant is someone that comes to the country legally, right? And they did that with the word racism, right? Oh, you know what? I didn't mention that. If you want to go to my YouTube channel, the Naked Truth Report YouTube channel, please go. You can see me in studio and live. Also, I'd like you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So it's the Naked Truth Report YouTube channel. You can share the videos, you can subscribe, and you can like. That I'd appreciate it. It's a good thing. Okay, so that's the housekeeping I wanted to do. And I also wanted to say, please go to powernomics.com. That's POWERNOMICS.com. That's Dr. Claude Anderson's website. He also runs the Harvest Institute, which is a think tank, and purchases library pack for $99. It's a good deal. It's a good deal. His latest book is a Black History Reader 101. And I've read that one, and it's a very good book. And so this goes back to what I was saying about Democrats twist the meaning of words. And one of those words that they've done that with, aside from immigrant and aside from spying, is racism. Now, racism In fact, I think it was in the 15th century. The word racism started in the 15th century in Europe, and it meant literally a race between groups. Oh, and this is what I also want to say. Tonight is the night for Game of Thrones. The final season premieres tonight. So think of life like Game of Thrones. And when you look at Game of Thrones, you can tell that in Game of Thrones, it is a competition between groups, right? So that is what racism, and that's how it was defined in the 15th century in Europe, is a literal race, a competition between groups. Racism is a competition between groups. So I take the position, everyone knows this, I've said it a billion times. My position is that my group, which is I call them what? Native Black Americans. My group has been relegated to a permanent underclass. So when we talk about reparations, and I don't know when we talk about fixing the fact that my group has been relegated to a permanent underclass, we talk about reparations, right? Remedial efforts, something to remedy what has happened. Now, most people, when they talk about reparations, I was watching Tucker Carlson and most conservatives, I should say, most conservatives, when they talk about reparations, they talk about slavery, right? Well, and those of us who know Native Black American history know that just talking about slavery is not sufficient, right? And it is a responsibility of Native Black Americans to know their history. We must know our history. We don't rely on other people to tell us our history. We know our history, correct? So when we're talking about remedying the fact that we are Native, that we have been relegated to a permanent underclass, and we know we've been relegated to a permanent underclass. How do we know that? Because we know the data. We know the data. And what does the data tell us? Well, right after slavery, Native Black Americans owned 0.5% of the wealth of America, right? So that was right after slavery. Now, we've been in this country 460 years. Today, we own 2%. I used to say 0.5%, but it's not 2%. It's not 0.5%, it's 2%. So today, Native Black Americans own 2% of the wealth of America. So we've gone from 0.5% right after slavery, when there were only 200,000 free Native Black Americans, to now being 14% of the population, where, let's see, that's, what is that? I don't know. 14% of the population is more than 35 million Native Black Americans, and we only have 2% of the wealth of America. That's regression. That's not progress. That's being relegated to a permanent underclass. And so it's not just slavery. We had 2 centuries of slavery, right? Oh, and actually, today is today's April 14th, am I correct? Yeah, today's April 4th. Today is the date that John Wilkes Booth murdered or assassinated, because he's a president. He's not a rapper, he's a president. You say, when it's a public figure like that, you say assassination. When it's a rapper, you say murder, right? Anyway, today, April 14th, is the day, I think it's 18, I don't remember, I don't want to say the day. Today is the day that April 14th, that John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln, right? So the question that I have is, how do you, I hate hypotheticals. I don't like hypotheticals, but how do you think things would have been different if I was going to say Kennedy, if Lincoln had lived? How would things be different if Lincoln had lived? So getting back to it, it's not just slavery, because we had 2 centuries of slavery. Then after slavery, what was it? Black codes, right? Native Black Americans, you must know your history. We had 100 years of Black codes. Well, not just Black codes, but what? Sunset laws and convict leasing. I think, I didn't see the PBS special on Reconstruction, but that's getting, after Reconstruction, in other words, after, I think in 1877, they had to send, after the Civil War, they had to send federal troops down to the South to protect freed slaves for until 1877. Right? Because they were still, the fact that, there was the Emancipation Proclamation, the war had ended, and Abraham Lincoln said, the slaves are emancipated, they're free. They still had to be protected because they were still what? Being subjugated to domestic terrorism in the South. Is that correct? Do you know your history, Native Black Americans? That's what I want to know. It is your responsibility to know it and to know all of it. So after Black codes and after sunset laws and after convict leasing and after meritorious manumission and all this domestic terrorism took place, right? What else was there? Benign neglect. And, we're having all this. It was like 100 years of all that. Black codes, sunset laws. And then, and even what was it? Was it Sherman? I know Ulysses S. Grant said, you can't set the slaves free and give them nothing. You got to give them something. And that's when they came in with the 40 acres and a mule. Well, that was blown, right? That didn't happen, right? That didn't happen. So here we go, moving on, history churning along, and we're still having Black codes, sunset laws, meritorious manumission, benign neglect, and we're moving up to what? Jim Crow. So we had 100 years of that kind of domestic terrorism of Black folks, keeping them down. Oh, and then Frederick Douglass also wrote about, and W.E. Du Bois in the 1800s, high immigration. You got high immigration. So, the slaves, they had trades because they were working on farms. They knew how to do agricultural things. They knew how to do, what is it when a person is working, an ironsmith, I think it is, when they're working with iron and welding. They had those trades, right? But so Frederick Douglass writes about this. So did Marcus Garvey. They write, why are you getting foreign labor? Why are you immigrating foreign labor when you got guys who have just been freed from slavery, who have skills, who have trades, and who need work, right? So that's what Frederick Douglass wrote about. So he wrote about that in the 1800s and Marcus Garvey. So now we're moving into the we're leaving the 19th century, right? And we're going into the early 20th century, the turn of the century, right? So we have Black folks just left slavery in the 1800s and they dealt with the sunset laws and all that stuff. You can't be out or at sunset or you'll be hung, so on and so forth. So now we're going into the turn of the century and we got what? High immigration, despite the fact that the newly freed slaves had skills. So I'm looking at this immigrant share of U.S. population approaches historic high. So around the turn of the century, the level 1850, we had the percentage of immigrants in the 1850s was 9.7. Then we get to the 1990s, it's 14.8. So what did they do in 1924? They enacted the National Origins Quota Act. They passed that. The National Origins Quota Act was passed in 1924 because they said, well, we've had enough immigrants. We've got to have a break from immigrants so that, we have time for these new folks to the country to assimilate, so on and so forth, right? But now, so these new immigrants were relegating the new slaves to a permanent underclass. These new immigrants around the turn of the century, right? So they passed this act in 1924. And so immigration went down. Now, Black folks Native Black Americans are still relegated to a permanent underclass because these new immigrants are taking what? The trade jobs that the newly freed slaves were qualified to do. Do you understand, folks? Okay, so then we're heading into, and Black folks built towns and stuff in the South. They built their own towns, and those towns were burned and so on and so forth. You can look that up. you can Google all of the domestic terrorism that took place for Black towns being developed, that Black towns were being developed, and how those towns were being hung. It's like, never let Black folks make money. Never let a Black man make money, ever. Keep him relegated to a permanent underclass. That's just the state of affairs he must remain in. And we're doing it again right now with these illegal aliens, but I haven't gotten to that yet. So we're now moving into, after 1924, we're moving into Jim Crow. See, now you know what Jim Crow was about, that relegating Native Black Americans to a permanent underclass. So here comes 1965, 1964, and right after 1965, what was passed? And I've always said this, right after 1965, the Immigration Act of 1965 was passed. So you see, we had a pause on high immigration because they wanted those immigrants to assimilate and become American. Because why? Because multiculturalism does not work. We must all be Americans. But the thing with Black Americans, with Native Black Americans, they always have had second-class citizenship, right? So now the 1965 Immigration Act passes, and not only are now Native Black Americans dealing with immigrants, legal immigrants, taking their trade jobs, now we get into like illegal aliens coming to the country. So now, and in fact, it says that the percentage of legal immigrants in 2017 was at 13.6. So the highest was at 14.7. So this is the rate of legal immigrants is 13.6 in 2017. So, but that's not including illegal. That's legal immigrants. That's not even including illegal. So what do we know now? We know that last month, over 100,000 illegal aliens, and the media and Democrats call them immigrants, illegal immigrants, because why? Because the Democrats in the media confuse terms. They mischaracterize terms. They twist and confuse everything. It's something like, I think Rahm Emanuel said, like, there's never a crisis you can't take advantage of or something. Just keep the folks confused. Just keep them all, confused thinking. And this is what they're doing with this, this is what they're doing with what Attorney General Barr said about the spying. See, it's never clear. It's never like simple. It's always muddied and muddled, and, you can't see the forest for the trees crying. You can never get a clear picture from Democrats about what's going down, about what is exactly happening. I like clarity, don't you? That's always the best thing, so that we know what we're dealing with. But the Democrats always keep it, shady. It's like murky. It's not clear. It's not. Anyway, I hear my music. I'll open up the phone lines. You can call in and talk to me about what I talked about. But there was just a few other things that I wanted to mention, and I'll mention them when we come back from the break. So this is the Kathleen Wells Show. You can go see me in the studio. Oh, what did I? Oh, yeah. I said, this is the Kathleen Wells Show. That's old habit. Gosh, I can't. Why did I say that? I don't know. This is the Naked Truth Report. You can go to the Naked Truth Report YouTube channel, and please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll be right back. And we'll continue talking about why Native Black Americans have been relegated to a permanent underclass, and we need a new deal for Native Black Americans. We'll be right back. How many? 2 minutes? What do I have? 2 minutes? Three? Okay. Regulate. He's a regulator. I'm so hot. Welcome back. Welcome back. I almost said it again. I almost said the Kathleen Wells Show. This is the Naked Truth Report. I'm your host, Kathleen Wells, and we're talking about stuff here. I can make the case. Of course, I can make the case for reparation. I was just talking to Mike Alexander, the show that comes on after mine, and I was saying, today is the date that John Wilkes Booth killed Abraham Lincoln. How would things be different if Abraham Lincoln had lived? I think it would be different definitely. I think we would. I don't know. I hate hypotheticals, so I don't even want to say. I don't even want to surmise, but just guess. But I do want to say that and Mike Alexander said to me, he said, it's always the same folks. It's always the same. John Wilkes Booth was against Republicans. He was an actor. How actors and actresses today talk about the Republicans. You see how things. Oh, and John Wilkes Booth. He killed Abraham. It's the same people throughout history. History repeats itself forever. It's always the same thing. And if you don't see that pattern, the consistency, you're not examining it closely enough. You're not getting down to the nitty gritty. Okay, you got to get down. Native Black Americans, you must know your history. You cannot rely on other people to tell you your history. So this is the other thing when they say that, how a lot of people say, well, I didn't own slaves. It's not about that. This is the debt America owes Native Black Americans. It has nothing to do with you individually. This is a debt America owes Native Black Americans for policies that have kept them relegated to a permanent underclass. So if you live in America now and you benefit from America, you have to take the burdens and the benefits. It has nothing to do with your personal behavior. This is America's debt. This is because America has kept Native Black Americans relegated to. This is the other thing I want to say. How in the heck have we allowed? How in the heck? Can I curse? Did I say a bad word? I don't know. That's against the FCC. Can I say the H word? Oh, I can say the H word. Hell, I can say hell. How in the heck have we allowed at least 13? You see, we never had illegal aliens in the country before before the Immigration Act of 1965 was passed. America has always had an immigration policy, and it always dealt with her immigrants in a uniform way regarding rules and regulations. So it's always the Democrats. This is what it's always the Democrats. If we examine history, they're always putting a monkey wrench in the betterment and improvement of America. They're always throwing lemons. It's always sour. They're always screwing something up. And this is, and I was on Twitter. I rarely go on Twitter, but you should please also join my Twitter account, because when they were bashing I was on Twitter when they were bashing Candace Owens when she testified before Congress. Wasn't she fantastic? I think she was fantastic. I've met Candace. I'm trying to get her on the show. I haven't gotten her on. Remember Brandon Tatum? He's like her good friend, and they're both returning. But maybe that'll happen, maybe not, whatever. But I think she's fantastic. I think she's super smart. And we need more of Candace Owens. I think of myself as like the older version of her. She appeals to millennials and I appeal to us older folks. But we're basically saying the same thing, and that is the Democrat Party is full of it. They're liars. So anyway, there was a historian from Princeton. I didn't know he was, I just responded to someone bashing. What I was thinking in my mind, I'm responding to someone bashing Candace Owens, and his name is I know his last name is Krause. Oh, his first name is Kevin. I think it's Kevin M. Krause. And I didn't know he was a Princeton professor. But I just said to him, when he was bashing, I tweeted to him when he was bashing Candace Owens. I said something to because he said that Candace Owens was ignorant. Now, I've met Candace Owens, and that girl is brilliant. I mean, she's quick she's quick. And she's calm and collected, and she has all this information in her brain. I mean, people who are ignorant do not possess a lot of information in their brain, and they cannot respond eloquently and in a calm fashion to what you're saying. and persuasively. If you look at her videos, you know she can respond to anything with in a professional way and with accurate information and accurate data. So this is not an ignorant person, okay? So anyway, I didn't know he was a Princeton professor. What is his name? Kevin M. Krause. He's a Princeton professor. He said, oh, Candace Owens is ignorant. She doesn't, because she said something. She said, oh, this is what she said. She said, the Southern strategy is a myth. Now, you know, my folks, we went to see The Death of a Nation, and Dinesh D'Souza said that less than 1% of people switched parties at that time, right? So, I think there's more to it. You know, this is the thing. Democrats have relied on this Southern strategy because it's clear that Democrats were against civil rights, they formed the KKK. You know, that was part of relegating, keeping Native Black Americans relegated to a permanent class was what? The formation of the KKK. And they were Democrats, right? So it is necessary to what is the word I'm looking for? To absolve Democrats from that liability or that charge that they're the same. They say they did the Southern. They say that the Southern strategy was implemented, and so when I said and I responded to this Princeton professor, Krause. I said, Kevin Krause, I said, I didn't know he was a Princeton professor, but I said, she is definitely not ignorant, and she knows the accurate political history. And I may have said something like, you're the one ignorant. No, I said, this is what I said. I said, stay in your lane. You know, I always tell people to stay in their lane, stay in your lane. I said, stay in your lane. Oh my God, the responses that I got back. I didn't know he was a Princeton professor. So obviously he's he's popular. You know, he has like millions of followers because he teaches at Princeton. And even like Soledad O'Brien even said, you know, everyone on Twitter was calling Candace Owens a fool, an ignorant person, a white supremacist. You know, they were bashing her. So I was going to defend her because I believe she believes that Black folks should get off the Democratic Party. We have enough evidence why we should. Because why? Because the Democratic Party is for illegal aliens. They put illegal aliens over and above Native Black Americans. Why? Because we have sustained that party for 6 decades, and we are only now we only possess 2% of the wealth of America. We had 0.5% of the wealth of America right after slavery, when there were only 200,000 free Black Native Black Americans. Now we only have 2% of the wealth of America, and we have been sustaining a party for 6 decades. We have gotten nothing out of that. We have gotten nothing out of it wasn't a bargain. We were somehow seduced or somehow convinced or persuaded to be Democrat, okay? And it's not, and they lied. They said that there was a switch. The party switched because of the Southern strategy. So anyway, when I said you're lying, you know, stay in your lane, they said, that is Kevin Krause's lane history. That's what they're like 20. I mean, I got like 200 responses. And they were like, that is what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. You know how liberals are. They're all emotion. It was just so crazy. But I responded to quite a few of them. And I said something, my responses were, well, what I say, stay in your lane, I mean that, not that he doesn't know history. I mean to say that the civil rights era is Native Black Americans' domain. It's our area to get it right and accurate. And don't you think Native Black Americans do the work, research this stuff backwards and forwards, up and down, trying to figure out what the heck went on? Because we want to know, because it's our investment. It's our life. It's our life. It's our parents and our grandparents and our uncles. It's their life. We want to know what went down and why things aren't working. So we do all the research. We're more invested than a white liberal in understanding that history. So that's what I meant by it. So he's a liberal. And so then I would say, they were saying he's received all these awards, he received all these accolades. Don't you know who Kevin Cross is? And so, I don't give a darn who Kevin Cross is. I don't go for white liberals because this is what I was tweeting. White liberals have destroyed Black America. Democrats have destroyed Black America. And I am not impressed with liberals. It's like a knitting circle. Liberals giving liberals accolades. And that's supposed to be legitimate. I don't think so. And, and also I mentioned Dr. Claude Anderson. Although Dr. Claude Anderson says that there was a Southern strategy, and I disagree with him on that. And I want to dig into it even further. But this is the thing. They said that Lee Atwater conceded to it. Okay. Now, Lee Atwater was I think the campaign manager for Nixon. So that would be let's fast forward to today. And Lee Atwater would be relying on something Lanny Davis says about the Clinton campaign, right? Like relying on Lanny Davis to say oh yeah, Trump colluded with the Russians. So that, this is a hypothetical. So in other words, if Lanny Davis said in an interview or said on a recording, Trump colluded with the Russians, and then for the next 50 years, we're going to believe that Trump colluded with the Russians. Do you see what I'm saying? So a strategist, political strategist says, yes, there was a Southern strategy or something like that. I don't know. I didn't hear the recording, but they used Lee Atwater's recording as proof there was a Southern strategy. But I learned when looking at Dinesh D'Souza's movie, Death of the Nation, that less than 1% actually switched parties. And then later some folks came in on Twitter and there's another book. I meant to write down the name of the book. I can't remember, but there's another book that, questions this narrative that there was a Southern strategy, that the parties switched. So we have to look at, in other words, it's not definitive. And it wasn't, this other book was saying that it wasn't race that motivated Southerners to start to become Republican. And we know that less than 1% switch parties. So it was a gradual change or a gradual shift or something like that. But it's not what the Democrats have led us to believe in. So the Democrats have remained the same. They're the same party. They led the KKK. They were John Wilkes Booth, who killed Abraham Lincoln. Maybe blacks if Abraham Lincoln were alive, maybe Native Black Americans, maybe the free slaves would have gotten their 40 acres and a mule, right? And how things would have been different if they had. Because 40 acres and a mule, in terms of present day value, this is the thing. 40 acres and a mule would be worth what today? What do you think? I think quite a bit. Things would have been so different for Native Black Americans if they would have gotten the 40 acres and a mule. And who blew that for us? The Democrats. And they're blowing things for us now. And we know why, because why? They have remained consistent. They're what is it? Last month, over 100,000 illegal aliens have come to the border last month. So we know that illegal aliens, we've gone over this 1,000 times on the show. We know that illegal aliens have relegated Black Americans to a permanent underclass. Why? Because illegal aliens have the construction jobs and they have the trade jobs. And what's left for Black men to do who don't have professional education or something like that? What's left for them to do? They should work construction. Yes, they should work trade jobs. And then if they're doing service jobs, they have to speak Spanish. See, you see this constant destruction of Native Black Americans. And you guys know that I live in the Leimert Park area, and on Crenshaw, you see Black people sleeping on the street. Now, when I was growing up, I moved back to this neighborhood where my dad died. I moved back in 2004. I used to live in Tucson. And when I moved back, when I was growing up in this area, this was a nice area. You never saw homeless people sleeping on the street. That was absurd. That was absurd. Now you see homeless people sleeping in the street, sleeping in their cars all over that area near Crenshaw. And also, if we all know about not death row, but we all know about the Skid Row, how horrific that is. And I just saw a documentary the other day on how Seattle is dying. You see, so there's nothing that Democrats throughout history, if you examine history, there's nothing that Democrats have ever done that has been for the betterment of America, for the progress of America as a whole. And as I said before, multiculturalism does not work. See, so now after the 1965 Immigration Act, we brought in all these folks from the underdeveloped or third world. Now these folks have a whole other agenda. They have a whole other interest, right? So Democrats did their shenanigans by, here they are controlling words and terms. They did their shenanigans by using the term people of color. And so and also using the term minority, you see. Because back before the Civil Rights Act, we didn't have these kind of terms like people of color or whatever. So now Native Black Americans are supposed to have the same interest as people of color. So that means everyone that comes from the underdeveloped world, everyone that has come in since this Immigration Act of 1965, we're supposed to have the same interests as these folks. You see how it's confusing? You see, when you're dealing with Democrats, everything is like a mess. Because we don't have their interests. But they told us we have the same interests so that they could, now these new groups, these other people of colors can get the benefits, you see, that Native Black Americans were supposed to get for suffering black codes and sunset laws and Jim Crow. Now these other people of colors are supposed to be getting these benefits. So now this is what, see, so now you have people like these new congresswomen, Ileana Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the other one, what's her name, Tlaib? They're saying they're suffering racism. That, oh, America is racist. Yet they're in Congress, you see. America's so racist. They don't have any legitimacy, and people buy it. Because and this is why we as Native Black Americans must understand our history and stop talking about racism. We need to talk about economics. Because no one has suffered like Native Black Americans. We are relegated to a permanent underclass because of illegal aliens, these other people of color, because of high immigration, you see. I think many of the people in Congress now who are people of color are African immigrants. They're not Native Black Americans. They have not been in the country since the 1600s, since its founding. Do you understand? But yet they've come here and they're talking about so much racism. Do you understand? They're keeping the focus on race. This is why Native Black Americans must distance ourselves from these groups of mere opportunistic folks. They don't have the depth of knowledge of our history. They don't have the depth of understanding of what went on. Native Black Americans, we should not use the term African American anymore because that's confusing the issues. Because African immigrants are African Americans. We have been in this country since its founding, our ancestors. So we are native to America. And it's not the same as Indians because, America is not the mere land. And Indians were here before America existed. But we are native to America when she was formed, and we were here for generations. Anyway, there's my music, and that was my show. To today I'm going to go home and watch Game of Thrones. I know it's negative, but it is kind of interesting. It is kind of fascinating. I like it a little bit. I want to know what's going on. Anyway, that was my show. Next week, I'll probably have a guest. I don't know. I'm going to play it by ear, but thanks for listening. This is the Naked Truth Report. Oh, and don't forget to go to Powernomics, POWERNOMICS.com and buy the library pack, Dr. Claude Anderson's 5 books for $99. Thanks. I'll see you next week. Thanks.